I haven't seen another rights holder take this approach to fandom.
Someone in the NFL had the brilliant idea at the time of why don't we allow teams to apply in an orderly way for international market activation. We've seen now, 25 clubs in 19 markets operating in that way.
The Chiefs probably make sense to be in every market right now because Taylor Swift's famous everywhere, right?
We have limited inventory at this point in time, so we can't satisfy everyone, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess that's an interesting question, right? As you increase the amount of international games, where is the sweet spot? Welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, the show exclusively for the people shaping the future of sport. Driven by my curiosity working within the industry, I started this show to host conversations with decision makers from the MLB to the ICC, unpacking their strategies and industry-shaping ideas. On today's episode, I'm joined by Brett Gosper, head of NFL Europe and Asia Pacific. Growing up in Australia, the recent announcement to bring an NFL match to the iconic MCG will be something of a full circle moment for Brett, who has, most notably, previously held the role of CEO of World Rugby. In today's conversation, we'll dive into these internationalization efforts, the NFL's global markets program, as well as how the league is creating an impact beyond the headline fixtures. So, without further ado, welcome to the Sports Pundit Podcast, Brett. It's great to have you with us.
Pleasure.
Where I like to start the conversation is a little bit around personal journey. So I guess a full circle moment for you is having grown up in Australia to now be working with the NFL and bringing a game to the iconic Melbourne cricket grounds. Maybe you can just talk through everything that's happened in between.
Certainly the game coming to Melbourne is good fun, like from my personal perspective, because I'm actually from Melbourne and grew up in Melbourne and was educated in Melbourne. And left at a reasonably young age in my early 20s to go and play rugby in France. But great venue for an NFL game. Obviously, probably the iconic building in the Melbourne landscape, with steeped in history, having hosted the first cricket test, AFL grand finals, a host of world-class soccer games and World Cup rugby games and internationals and so on. So whether it be rugby league or rugby union. So, real epicenter of the history of sport in not just Melbourne, but in Australia. So great to have an NFL game in that context, in that venue, will create huge excitement, not just in Melbourne, but across the country.
Yeah. You mentioned that you used to play rugby. You obviously went on to become CEO of World Rugby. What are some of the learnings that you take from your experiences when you come across the NFL, which has predominantly been a rights holder that's activated very strongly in America, but hasn't had the same global participation as a sport like rugby?
Yeah, I think the difference, obviously, one's a federation, one's a league. So the driving objective of a federation is to drive participation. To do that, you have to have a strong presence on the ground. And historically, rugby has a very strong presence across, a large number of markets. I think there are federations in about 110 markets around the world. So that significant presence demonstrates how, when you do have a presence, you can engage with the local community, you can create participation, you can create opportunities to grow the sport. And I think certainly my own learning is that, and I think the NFL have seen, we've opened offices in places where we know it will create more cultural connection with that local market and make the NFL more culturally relevant in those markets where we do have offices. We can't open offices everywhere. That's, economically prohibitive in some ways, but certainly in some of the priority markets, we've sort of earmarked about 12 to 13 of the global markets as being priority for us. That's probably the direction of travel over time. And as I say, rugby, in my experience in World Rugby, show that where you do have a strong office, you do have that strong connection, then growth in participation will come and growth in the value of your sport will come.
Yeah, on that participation side, maybe it's worth just explaining the headline matches that happen. For example, the games at Wembley and Tottenham get a lot of coverage, but there is, there's an academy at Loughborough University, there's a player pathway program.
Correct.
But maybe it's worth, for those that aren't fully versed on everything the NFL is doing and everything under your remit, just explaining a little bit about the different parts of your role, because it sounds to me like there are some elements of crossover in terms of that federation type.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about the NFL, it does behave a little bit like a federation in some ways. It feels the responsibility of growing the sport around the world, obviously for its business interests, but there's also a feeling that this sport is too good to keep just the United States, but that everyone should share in it. And that's the feeling of ownership and management at the league. I think good to underline that our mass participation sport is actually flag football, which has recently been named as an Olympic sport for LA 28, driven by the desire of the organising committee in the IOC to have a new sport that will capture the imagination of the local market in America. But obviously, our desire is to become a fully permanent Olympic sport at some stage, and we're setting our sights also on Brisbane 32 to demonstrate we can actually enhance those games as we go forward and generally the Olympic movement. So that mass participation sport is obviously run globally by IFAF, which is the International Federation of American Football. We partner with them very closely to drive participation like a federation. For us, those participants become fans eventually, and the small ecosystem of those families become fans as well. So we see obvious commercial benefit in that, but again, it's evangelistic in terms of growing the connection of the sport in the many countries. So our Olympic ambition is important to us. Um, Also outside of the market, we try and spike interest and gather cultural relevance in those markets by creating homegrown heroes that provide real impact for those countries where those players come from. So we have an academy. In fact, we've now got two academies. We have a regional academy based at Loughborough University, which is, as everyone knows, in the UK, a high performance centre, not just for education, but for many of the Olympic sports and so on. So we have a strong academy up there with 60 or so athletes from about 13 different countries and so on, which is a high school level academy that then sends or prepares athletes, and it has an educational component to US Division 1 colleges and hopefully onward to the NFL at some point in time. And it goes on the theory that in order to create NFL players, they actually need to be learning the sport from quite an early age. We also have another academy on the Gold Coast in Australia, which we opened last year, and that's for the APAC region. Obviously, a wealth of talent in Australia, both from other sports crossovers, but also from the Asia Pacific region itself, where the Pacific Islands provides some great athletes for American football and the different positions that can offer up. Obviously, also there's some great kickers, punters coming out of Australia as well. So there are two regions that we have the academy. We have the international player pathway as well, where we identify athletes in different markets around the world and bring those players into a program which ultimately, hopefully, has them selected on either practice squads or squads of NFL teams
Mhm.
in the future. Jordan Mailata, who was one of the winning Super Bowl teams of the Eagles,
Mhm.
a left tackle, is one of the successful graduates of that scheme, and there are others, um, more high profile people in recent times like Lewis Rees-Zammit, the Welsh rugby player and so on. So always trying to find opportunities to create that bridge with the new growing international markets
Yeah.
and enhance that relevancy to those markets by finding heroes from those markets, and we're very active in that domain.
Yeah, and I can imagine, like you say, it's so important to build up the foundations because if you need people to be playing it from an early age, then you need to have your presence, and it seems like that's what you're doing with both with flag football, but also with these programs and setting something up on the Gold Coast, setting something up in Loughborough. Um, in terms of people converting, like you mentioned, Louis Rees-Zammit, there's a lot of punters, I guess, that come from the AFL, which involves a lot of kicking, but there hasn't been that many stories yet of transition across. So I guess that's why there's now maybe more of a focus on trying to get people playing the sport from an earlier age and really understanding the intricacies of the sport itself.
Correct. I mean, some of the more high profile positions in NFL require a degree of technical understanding and knowledge and experience, which is difficult. They tend to be the running backs, the wide receivers, and particularly, obviously, the quarterback. Almost needs to have been a quarterback from age 6 or 10 or whatever. Very early on, and certainly the offensive and defensive lineman is an easier entry point, but probably not quite as
Yeah.
high profile as some of those other, let's say, often seen as more glamorous positions. But we're working on all elements of that.
Mhm. So in terms of fandom, player nationality is going to be one part of that, and you see that also in other sports. You know, like the Premier League, for example, benefits massively from having players from different markets. I'm a Spurs fan, and you see a lot of Korean fans, for example. So it's definitely a very worthwhile cause to be pursuing because international players definitely do drive fandom from the areas. But with that aside, how else are you trying to build up your presence?
I mean, we also, just to note, we've got about 85 foreign-born players that recorded a snap in 2024. So there are
Yeah,
a large number of foreign-born players that are actually on the field, which is something that we're drawing as much attention to as we possibly can. We also have a heritage program where players have got a legitimate connection with a certain market. They may not have been born there, their parents may have been, they may have resided there for a long time, but we've got over 300 players and coaches that can put a flag on their helmet, and those flags get picked up in those markets and noted. That connection again provides relevance to those fans. So,
yeah.
you know, anything that can make the NFL a more tangible connection to those markets is gonna raise interest in those markets in a good way. So, yeah, they're just some of the programs that we operate to increase the cultural relevance and connection.
Mhm.
And obviously, playing games in selective markets, we've seen a broadening of our horizons in terms of where we're gonna play those games. The recently voted from 4 to 8 games from 2025 now allowed, and compulsory for teams over an 8-year period to host 2 games in a foreign market. All of this, again, adds to the global profile of the league and that connection that we're looking for.
Yeah. Your point about the flag reminded me of a story that I read recently about Cole Palmer, who wears the St. Kitts flag on his boot.
That's right.
And like the pride that that brings to that country, even though he represents England at international level, like there is like this like recognition of heritage, and people can take a lot of pride in that. And I think the same would be true for a lot of NFL players in particularly African countries. I noticed there was a lot of Nigerians that have come through the academy. Uh,
Yeah. Some outstanding athletes and certainly, OCU Manura, who's the head of our Africa efforts,
mhm.
is always on the lookout and
Yep.
providing life-changing opportunities for many, budding athletes in Africa. But there's no question there are some incredible athletes
Mm.
that are well suited to NFL coming out of Africa, and Nigeria obviously being the major source of that. So great opportunity for players.
Maybe not necessarily commenting on Africa specifically. I'm curious how you think about the NBA's approach in terms of having Basketball Africa League and having something set up that's maybe more permanent.
In the past, we've had, regional, there's a European league that the NFL was funding a while back, and it had some success, and it certainly, I think, has laid some foundation, particularly in Germany, where most of those teams were playing, to create some resonance in the market. I think generally speaking, fans these days want to see the best of the best, and focusing our efforts on merchandising and raising the profile of the key Premier League, which is the NFL, would seem to be a better route for us to create that interest globally. So, we're happy with our focus, and not many leagues around the world in other codes and so on are able to do that, to actually bring regular season games, not exhibition games, or not second tier games, but the gold standard NFL games to foreign markets, and that is proving to be successful for us.
Hmm. Yeah. So talking of those international games, there's been a flurry of announcements over the last month. I guess because of the Super Bowl, it's probably not a nice timing piece to be announcing around that flagship event. But for anyone that's missed them, maybe it's worth you just going through where international games will be. The one that caught my eye and led me to reach out initially was the announcement of the Madrid game with Miami Dolphins playing at the Bernabeu in Real Madrid's home. And then
Great stadium, yeah.
I think there was Dublin and Melbourne, which we've already spoke about a little bit about, and I think also an expansion to Berlin as well as already having a game in Munich.
That's it. Well, we're taking advantage, as I said, of the vote, which allows or demands in many ways 8 games a season in 2025. We'll probably do 7 in 2025, and that, as you say, we've announced Berlin, which is a new city for us in Germany, and we've announced the Colts as the host team there, the
Yep.
designated team. We've got the 3 games in London, as we've had, with Jets and Browns at Tottenham and Jags at the Wembley Stadium. We've, as you said, announced an exciting new country for a game, which is Spain, and that will be at the world famous Bernabeu, Real Madrid Stadium in Madrid. Um, Sao Paulo has been announced as well, back to Brazil in Sao Paulo, this time the Chargers being the designated team. And yeah, for the first time in Ireland, where the Steelers have a long connection with the Rooney family ownership in Ireland. And yeah, that'll take place at Croke Park as well. So, what expanding that footprint and gathering that interest across those markets, but also the markets that are close to those markets, where you get a lot of inbound people. I've had so many people in England ask me about the Dublin game, not to mention how many people are in America with that interesting affinity between America and Dublin. There's a lot of inbound interest, but all of the new first games always get this incredible excitement, and we build from there.
Yeah, I found this. I lived in Australia for 2 years, and it feels like everyone wants to be Irish, Scottish, Welsh. No one wants to be English. But when you talk to anyone in the US or Australia, they're always much more proud of their heritage. If it's particularly the Irish one, I think the US celebrates St. Patrick's Day more than Ireland does.
It's huge, yeah, it's huge. And I mean, I didn't mention Melbourne because it's 26, but Melbourne obviously, new market, new city, and so,
Yeah,
yeah, a flurry of announcements, and it's true Super Bowl provides an incredible podium for any of our announcements. There's a the focus and attention of a large part of the world is on the event that is the Super Bowl, and therefore anything
yeah.
we announce at that time resonates and reverberates brilliantly around the world. So I think we gathered a lot of excitement for that. And obviously Super Bowl is the entry point for most casual fans into the NFL, to having interest in the NFL per se. And that's our big recruitment engine in terms of fandom around the world. Most people's first, or over 50% of people's first introduction to the NFL is via Super Bowl.
And just to go back to a point you made earlier about flag football, I guess that's why the NFL puts a significant effort into putting on, I think it was a 90-second, maybe a 60-second advert around flag football during the Super Bowl.
That's right. It's been like that the last 2 or 3 years. We've focused on flag, and it's showing phenomenal growth around the world, in America, of course, but also in places, far away place, Mexico, not that far away, but China, parts of
Mm.
Asia, Japan, Australia. There's been incredible growth. So we're seeing it. And, I saw this at World Rugby when rugby was named as Olympic sport 2009 and entered the Olympic arena in 2016 in Rio. The excitement and growth engine that provided, I'm seeing that for flag football now,
Yeah.
even all before you get to the Olympics itself, to execute interest, government interest, federation interest, the hunt for medals, the money that flows, but the fan interest that flows and participation interest is huge.
In terms of going back to the designated markets, right? You said, I think you had maybe 12 markets that were priorities for you. How are those decided? What are the parameters that you're taking into consideration when you're putting together a list of those markets?
Yeah, I mean, there's a large number of parameters. Obviously, general macroeconomic figures, whether it be size of market, GDP.
Mm.
Also, we can measure the size of a sports fan market, um, the size of our own fan base in some of these markets. If we believe that games can generate excitement, obviously the ability to host games, is there a fit for purpose stadium in that market is helpful. Is there help in logistics and other from local government or otherwise? Um, the opportunity for growing over time in that market, and the perspective that we see in broadcast relationships. It works well where we have good broadcast relationships. Often there's a free to air and a pay channel component to that. But having good media partners on the ground in those markets gives us the belief that and the confidence that we can grow the sport in those markets. So there are many criteria that we work our way through to determine what are the top 12, 13 markets or so that
Yeah.
we can see growth in.
In terms of, you mentioned the Steelers and the relation to Ireland, Miami Dolphins and Madrid. I guess there's a Spanish speaking element with Miami having a lot of Spanish speaking inhabitants. Is that something that also plays into this? Is it like you have a list of 12, but then there's maybe 5 or 6 on there where you're like, oh, we have teams that would be really good fits for these specific markets, and they're helping you to decide that? Or
Yeah, there's a little bit of a crossover, and we have what's called the Global Markets Program. So until about 3 years ago. We're in year 3 of that program.
Yeah.
3 years ago, teams couldn't activate commercially or in marketing terms outside of a 75-mile radius of their stadium. And that is obviously to organize in a coherent way the noise levels and the commerciality of each team in their own markets in the United States. And someone in the NFL had the brilliant idea at the time of, why don't we allow teams to apply in an orderly way for international market activation? They apply to the league, they show a really coherent and deep marketing commercial plan. The league looks at that and then decides if that's a program which merits, moving into the market and operating at that time. And we've seen now, 25 clubs in 19 markets operating in that way. And there's often their own logic. There's often, what we like is that they operate mostly within the 12 or 13 markets that are our priorities, because
Yeah.
they also know that we can partner them better in those markets and we can join our efforts up. But there are examples of other markets where ownership, for their own reasons, have a particular affinity with a market, and we allow that, the exercising of their marketing commercial rights in those markets. So those things, again, you're reconciling which teams will play. They show their preference for certain markets that they may have chosen or not, but we try and create that affinity, help those teams land in the markets which are dear to them.
Yeah.
But also, we know where the fans appreciate certain brands ahead of others, and we try to align that as well. So there's a number of factors that create the landing of a certain team in a certain market for games.
Yeah. Why go down that route of that sort of fragmented approach? Because I haven't seen another rights holder take this approach to fandom or to international sort of marketing. If it's the Premier League, for example, a Liverpool, for example, will want to be in Asia, will want to be in the US, it will want to be in Australia, it will want to be everywhere. Whereas it feels like the NFL has sort of divvied up the globe in a different way, which I can understand some of it, but I also wonder from a fandom perspective, if fandom works like that, does everyone not want to be with the success of the Eagles and the Chiefs, for example, and Taylor Swift being so closely affiliated to the Chiefs, right? Like, the Chiefs probably make sense to be in every market right now because Taylor Swift's famous everywhere, right?
The thing is, though, I mean, the economics shows that you've got to focus your efforts in the right way. I think what's
Mhm.
great about the NFL is the coherent, unified purpose of NFL ownership. And
Mhm.
they understand that when working together and working in a coherent way and aligning interests and organizing our deployment, it's going to be more effective than just everyone else going and doing their own thing in their own way without really consulting the broader group and so on. So I think it's what makes the NFL quite a unique organization, is the unified purpose between league office, clubs, and the overall ownership unified effort to make the overall pie grow in commercial terms. So I think the NFL's going about it in, maybe it's a unique way, maybe it's only unique to the NFL in that sense, but it's certainly effective.
Mhm. Are there any markets that you would like to see more clubs in? Or, you said that a lot of those 12, 13 markets are covered currently. Are there any that you're bullish on for the future?
I think, as I said, we're bullish on those 12 or 13 markets that we've prioritized, and they tend to be the markets that the clubs gather in. So we're pretty happy with the rollout as it stands. What we do notice, though, is where we play our games, the clubs tend to gravitate towards, because that provides some natural tentpole moments for those clubs as well. So as we roll out games in other markets, I think we'll see an increase in the deployment of clubs in those markets as well, which is a natural thing. At the moment, a large number of those clubs are in, Mexico, United Kingdom, and Germany, where we've traditionally played a lot of games. But as we roll further games out, I think we'll see a broadening of that presence.
Yeah, I noticed you have a presence in China from an office perspective, but there's not currently a game in Asia, if you count Australia as sort of Oceania. Is that a market where a game could potentially come? And I mean, there's a few examples already where, like, for example, in Germany, you have your offices in Dusseldorf, but the games are in Berlin and Munich. And with Australia, your office is in Brisbane, which I assume is related to the fact that the Olympics will be there. but then your game is in Melbourne. So I'm not necessarily
Yeah,
suggesting.
like, look, I don't know if you have to be in the city where the game's actually played. I mean, we obviously deploy on a national basis, not on an individual city basis, and
Yeah.
there are different reasons why we're in different places from an office perspective, and it doesn't necessarily reflect the execution of a game. And we have lots of inbound resource that comes in and over a period of time and executes those games a lot either from out of London or out of the US and so on. So what's relevant about those local offices, how they engage local markets, local fandom, whether it be across flag or other tentpole marketing activities and so on, less related to the actual execution of the game. But look, we have inbound interest that far outweighs actually the game inventory that we currently have on all regions of the world. And so, let's see how things roll out in the coming years.
Okay. Yeah, I guess one surprise with the kind of extension of games to new markets is that there isn't a game in the Middle East, given that the Middle East has been aggressively acquiring kind of top tier sports rights, like, Copa del Rey final, I think, is in Saudi. I think the Italian Cup final is also in the Middle East. EuroLeague basketball, I think, is now going to be played in Abu Dhabi. Like, it feels like there's a lot of sporting events gravitating towards the Middle East. And
Sure, we're feeling a lot of inbound interest from that region, but we've not taken any steps at this point in time. But I think, as I said, in all regions, there is a high desire to host NFL games. They have high impact globally, high impact back into the States. So there is very high interest in all regions for us to deploy a game. And again, we have limited inventory at this point in time, so we can't satisfy everyone, unfortunately.
yeah, I guess that's an interesting question, right? As you increase the amount of international games, where is the sweet spot? Because there's an element of taking these games internationally. But for example, if you're an LA Rams fan and you like to go to all the games in LA, and now one of the games is being played in Melbourne, where do you think that tipping point lies between not upsetting local fans and making sure your expanding international fan base is happy?
Yeah, but the NFL is very conscious of that. And the clubs obviously don't want to upset their fans by taking, major games away from their fans and so on. That would cause problem. I think we've been fortunate that the increase in the number of games has come with increase in regular season games in the regimen, in any case, coming from preseason games being shifted into the season. So clubs have not felt, or fans have not felt, they've lost games. While they may have lost the odd international game, there's been an increase in inventory into the regular season in the recent years as well. So, um, and there's been talk at the commissioner and ownership level of the possibility of even increasing further to maybe an 18-game regular season. So, that inventory has helped the fans accept that growth and that push into international.
Hmm. And in terms of trying to serve these international markets outside of those sort of flagship matches, what are some of the strategies there? Because, for example, Sports Pundit, which has a newsletter as well, and we'll quite often meet up. One of the bars we use is in Victoria. It's called Greenwood Sports Pub. And I noticed that Sport London, which is the group that own that pub and a number of other sports pubs, have a partnership with the NFL. And it looked like you had a partnership also with a pub chain in Leeds. So,
I mean, this is all part of this is what local officers do. They build that bridge culturally with the local market as best they can. Obviously, pubs is a big part of watching sport in the United Kingdom. That's one element where we're providing access to games in an environment which is very local here in across the UK and so on. The role of the office is to raise the profile and to broaden our fan base in those markets. And there are various ways through events, through marketing, through content, through influencers, through creators, through our relationships with broadcast partners to raise that profile and enhance that connection. In Germany next week, I think it's Mardi Gras in Düsseldorf. There'll be an NFL float, up the main street, throwing sweets to the crowd. I mean, the NFL brand is also at Oktoberfest. I mean, it's engaging in a culturally relevant way in the markets that we operate in across a broad array of events that can happen in that market. And those events may be local events or events that we create ourselves around NFL-led timings of, draft, the combine, Super Bowl, obviously, playoffs, and so on. and even Thanksgiving as some of the American, holiday times as well, which can becoming increasingly relevant or impactful in other markets.
Yeah. I I think the content point is an interesting one there in terms of driving that fandom, right? The Super Bowl obviously gets a huge amount of coverage on free to air TV and media publications. It's basically impossible to miss that the Super Bowl is happening in the UK. But obviously, the NFL more broadly has agreed matches to be on Netflix on Christmas Day. Netflix obviously is a global platform. You've also got games on YouTube for the Sunday ticket.
Yeah.
So, like, that's all going to be increasing, I guess, visibility for the NFL in international markets. And to your point around creators as well, like that NFL Sunday ticket seems to have come with a kind of increased appetite to work alongside creators and partner with them to create content that also then reaches their broader audiences that maybe aren't entirely aware of NFL or followers of the sport yet.
Correct, and I couldn't have put it any better myself.
Fair enough. I
I
think
think with the whole, Netflix was exciting, and some of these global platforms are very exciting, and Netflix, I think, is both a symptom of the global growth of the NFL, but also, an example of how you can drive that global growth on platforms such as that, and the Netflix example was a successful operation and will continue to be in the coming Christmases, so it's great.
And also, I think that the genius of playing on Christmas Day is there's very little to compete with in terms of I don't know of another sport, at least not in the UK, that plays on Christmas Day itself.
It's
So,
true. Yeah, it's a space that is very ownable. Obviously, there's some other traditions in other markets which you're up against that aren't necessarily sporting. There are viewing habits which are quite different that day. But again, providing the opportunity to watch NFL games on that day is special.
mhm. And in terms of just wrapping things up, because I think we're coming to an end, I would just love to get your take on what success looks like over the next maybe. I feel like 5 to 10 years is maybe too long.
Be long enough. I mean, the NFL takes a long view on our progress. Yeah, it's as a privately owned 32 majority individual owners of the NFL, 31 that actually Green Bay is a fan owned organization. But they do fortunately take the long view. It's not about following what the stock market or something else is doing in the next year or two. And we do each year we update a 10-year plan, and we do look at a 10-year horizon on most of what we do. And broadcast cycles are 4 or 5 years, and you've got to look beyond this cycle to the next cycle and so on, which is probably the key source of our revenue broadcast. So that's we keep an eye on that. But success is seeing significant growth in our fan base in markets, particularly in that younger age group, which is important for our future. The Gen Z, as it's referred to, is important. Seeing that fan growth and over time, commercializing that fan base and monetizing it in a positive way, and seeing the awareness and favorability of our brand grow in that period is some of the key success factors that we look for.
Yeah. That targeting of Gen Z, I'm curious, is that because the fan habits of maybe older generations is already formed, and so it's harder to create a new fandom or a new habit or a new following for a sport? Is that something you've identified?
Yeah, you have your habits at that older age group and so on. It's good to capture that younger audience. We seem to be having a lot of success with that younger audience. We have a higher share of that audience than most sports, certainly a higher share in America of that Gen Z, but also we see in markets like the UK and Germany, we have a higher share than some of the more, let's say, established local sports and so on. That generation loves the statistical complexity, the storylines, the entertainment dimension of it. So growing that audience is growing our future, and that seems to be happening in a successful way currently.
Yeah, for sure. I actually interviewed Josh Helmrich, who works within the NFL's data team. And we talked a lot about that. And that was an event that was put on by Bundesliga, actually. So again, ties back into all of this international kind of cross collaboration.
Yeah, and we work with the other leagues as well. We've got good relationships with the Premier League in the UK and the Bundesliga in Germany, La Liga in Spain, and other leagues where we operate. We have a lot of good knowledge share. We have a lot to learn from each other in these leagues, and I think people can see that there's space in the sports market for the differing codes and the differing leagues, and we have growth areas that are compatible with each other. So it's been an interesting part of this job, getting to understand some of the objectives of some of the other leagues and working with them in areas. So yeah, it's been good.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'll keep an eye out. I was lucky enough to go to an NFL UK game last year, so I'll keep an eye out for what's to come, and I won't be asking you for tickets, don't worry. I'm sure you already have enough people doing that, but
You can always ask. You can always ask.
maybe we can grab a beer at Greenwood at some point over a match.
That'd be great. Anytime. You know where to find us.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Pundit podcast. I'll include more info about the guest and the topics covered in the show notes. And you can also find my LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect and let me know what you thought. Visit sportspundit.co to find previous editions of the podcast, access the newsletter, and to sign up for our WhatsApp group and see upcoming social events in cities around the world. See you again soon.